because I know there is kind of two, I don't know if it's schools of thoughts, maybe just two approaches to changing behavior. And that's I need to change what I think, who I am, and that leads to a change in behavior. And then there's a change in behavior that leads to a change in the way I think or believe. I want to hear a little bit about your approach and why this do become flywheel is so effective in cultivating humility.
So yeah, I love the way you phrase that. Like it's the chicken and the egg. Which comes first? What I think about myself or how I behave. It's not about which one comes first. You just get that process started. And so in short, the do become flywheel it means is that the things we do something to us. We are desiring creatures. It's our vision of the good life that shapes us, not our beliefs. And you see this because you meet people in church who they can give you all the right answers for who Jesus is and what they should do, but then you watch how they live outside of that hour on Sunday morning, and you're like, what happened to all that stuff you said you believed? And what that shows is that, again, our thoughts don't drive everything we do.
Welcome to this episode of the Modern Day Missionaries podcast. Y'all are in for a treat because you're about to meet my friend, Dr. Josh Wymore. Josh is an executive coach, and he's coached Fortune 500 leaders all over the world. He's the author of Humbler Leadership, which is an excellent book on humility in leadership and why it really changes everything. It makes such a difference. And he himself walks in humility as he serves leaders all around the world, and was really excited to speak to all of you as missionaries today. And gosh, did I love today's interview. It is chock full of so many nuggets of wisdom that will help you be the kind of leader that you actually want to be. So get ready to dive into today's interview with Dr. Josh Wymore. Josh, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. It's so fun to be with you, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
It is. Josh and I are coworkers as well. We're on the same team at Leaders Q, where we do leadership coaching. And so we have gotten to be friends over our time working there together. And Josh is a brilliant mind in the leadership space. Found out that his cousin, the whole time I was serving in Peru, lived just a few minutes away from where I was. So all these fun connections. And he came out with a book called Humble Leadership that is outstanding, and I really felt it was going to be a blessing to all of our listeners today. So Josh, I just want to dive right in. As missionaries, I think most of us are already making humility a priority in our lives. I mean, hopefully that's the case. We're thinking about cultural humility, spiritual humility, but your research and work in leadership humility, I think, takes it to another level. So beyond the spiritual reasons for humility that we're all aware of, you really talk about how humility is everything in leadership. And so I just want to ask you, what makes humility so powerful that it can transform the way we lead, especially in this mission space?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephanie. I would say I'll adjust something that you said there. I wouldn't say that humility is everything, but I'd say it's the foundation for everything. That, for you to be a good influencer, a good decision maker, an inspiring leader, really humility is that foundation. Because when you think about what humility is, but the four pillars that I found in my research were that it's an accurate self-perception, appreciating others' strengths and contributions, a growth mindset, and a greater purpose. And so for me to be teachable, to learn, to grow, I have to recognize I don't know it all. That's accurate self-perception and a growth mindset. For me to call people to lay their lives down in service of a cause, even to give their lives to Jesus. Well, that's a greater purpose. And so if I'm missing one of those things, I'm not going to be teachable. I'm not going to be a great coworker. I'm not going to be inspiring over the long haul. And so humility is almost that operating system that every other leadership competency is built on.
Yeah. And you talk about that through the humility paradox in your book. I'd love for you to break that down for us. And let's just look at what it is. And then why do so many leaders, including missionaries, get humility wrong?
Yeah. So a paradox, you probably know, are two seemingly contradictory things that when you take them together are true. And what's fascinating, when you work with humble leaders, you recognize that on one hand, they're very aware of their weaknesses and their limitations. They're quick to admit when they're wrong and own their mistakes, which we would think, just in knowing people, that would make them less confident, right? Like they're insecure or something like that. But that's actually not true. They often are confident at the same time that they're acknowledging their weaknesses. And that's because they're also highly aware of their gifts and their strengths and their blessings. And so they're very confident in those areas too. And the paradox is that the further you walk down both of those trails at the same time, that you become more aware of those gifts and more aware of kind of the depth of your brokenness, humility is what's created in the gap between those things. So humble people are very aware of both those things at the same time. And that's the paradox, that it's not just I'm awesome or I'm terrible. It's, yeah, actually I'm beautiful and I'm broken. I'm designed in the image of God, and every part of me is depraved in some way. And the more I lean into that, the more humility is kind of created in that space.
Which is so good, because I do think people often tend to go towards one or the other. Like, I'm awesome, like you said, or I'm the worst. And so you're saying a humble leader says, man, I have so many shortcomings, and look at how God has equipped me to serve. I'm going to take full advantage of the skills he's given me as well.
That's right. Because both those things are true. And fundamentally, humility is about living in reality. That's what the root word humus actually means, earth or ground. And so when you say, oh, that person's really grounded, or he's got both his feet firmly planted on the ground, we're saying they're living in reality, and we're saying that they're humble. Humility is not the low self-esteem. We often think that that's what humility is, but no, humility is embracing truth, embracing reality.
And you talk about a practice that you do in the evening to make yourself aware of both of those things. What is that you do?
Yeah, it's really leaning into that humility paradox. Christians who are familiar with the daily examine will find that really this is kind of the daily examine. God, where did you show up in the course of my day? What were those gifts that I received? What were the places where I got to show up and offer a word of encouragement? It felt so great. God, thank you for that. Thank you, Holy Spirit, for working through me in that way. And also, where was I selfish? Where did I talk more than I needed to? God, forgive me for that. Heal those relationships. And so that process of thanking God and confessing our sin, really, I mean, it's something that Christians have been doing for thousands of years. I just took it and put it in more secular terms for audiences that are not coming from faith backgrounds, because that process, whether you're a Christian or not, is so good to center you in reality and correct for those biases that you mentioned of either thinking too highly of myself or thinking too little of myself.
Yeah, and actually it really challenged me, Josh, when I was reading about that, because I've known about the daily examine for years. I will be honest, it's something I've never really wanted to do, because for me, I love thinking about the thankfulness piece and all the good things God has done in my life. But sitting down and thinking about where did I screw up during the day, I mean, it felt like oppressive sometimes. And I think that's really revealing for me. I was just like, okay, so I should be able to look at where I messed up and not take it so personally and not be so crushed by it. So, that was just even a great thing. So I'm just curious for all of our listeners, do you guys do the daily examine? And if you do, is it hard for you or is it easy for you? Are you somebody who tends more towards I am awesome, or, God, I messed up again and nothing is ever good enough? And some of those questions that come to your mind, it's actually helpful to do the daily examine, because it does kind of reveal where your heart's at and gives you a chance to have true humility, like you said, where you are high on both of those things, rather than in one or the other. So that's so good. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think your experience is not uncommon, right? Nobody wants to live in that spot. And I think Brene Brown's work on guilt versus shame is really helpful here. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but oftentimes when we're feeling bad about ourselves, it's because we're feeling shame, which is, I am bad, versus guilt, which is I did something bad. And when we avoid guilt because it feels icky like shame, then we miss the chance to own our mistakes and to make things better. And the reality is guilt is actually really productive. Shame is really toxic. So in that moment, how do we say, wow, yeah, I screwed up? And as Christians, then we have this really cool opportunity. Brother Lawrence talks about this in the practice of the presence of God, that when he comes to God with his sin, he gives it to God and he says, basically, God, without you, this is all I would ever be. And then he doesn't think anything else about it. And it's this irony that almost his sinfulness is a way that he feels closer to God, because it makes him recognize how holy God is and how gracious God is at the same time. So even that confession of sin becomes an opportunity to worship.
Absolutely. I know in Gentle and Lowly, that's discussed quite a bit as well. That whole idea of Dane Ortman, that idea of running to God, because he actually, I think he compares it, or Jesus, to like a doctor going to visit people in a remote area where they don't have access to medical attention. And that doctor going in, and what does he want to do? And how would he feel if all of the people he went to serve were like, we don't need your help. Like, we're going to take care of it ourselves. Like, no, he wants to go and help because they don't have access to medical care, and he knows he can help. And that's the Lord with us. And so it's bringing all of ourselves to him. So it was good. It was funny how you read something and you hear something 1,000 times, and then there's that one moment where it suddenly just clicks. And that was what happened for me. So thank you, Josh, on a personal level. Thank you. On a follow-up, I got to ask, Josh, are you just this naturally humble guy where they just came so easy for you? And like everyone knew one day Josh was going to write about humbler leadership.
Well, my wife's probably going to hear this, so I can't lie on this podcast. No, it was really funny, actually. I went back and I get to speak at my undergrad alma mater at Laterno University and share about the book. And that was probably the least humble phase of my life. And there were some of my friends who were like working there now. And so as I'm getting up on the stage, I'm like, so some of you are probably really surprised to see me up here talking about humility. Because no, it's not natural for me. To me, it's like learning a second language. And, I realized this when I learned Spanish. When I was taking Spanish classes in high school, I understood English better as a result. And I was in some ways better at teaching Spanish to other people because I had to learn it myself painstakingly. It wasn't instinctive for me. And so when I had my first experience with a humble leader in college, I realized like, whoa, this guy has tools I don't have. I got to figure this out. And as I started to figure out, it's like, well, I got to teach other people this because this has been so powerful for me. So no, I'm not naturally humble. I'm a lot humbler now than I was 15 years ago, but I have plenty of friends who can testify to the fact that I have a lot of room to grow. And I'm not saying that to be falsely modest. Like it's true. I mean, we're all on that journey. And I think that's the reason for the name Humbler Leadership is no matter where you are, if you're Gandhi or Mother Teresa or you're college Josh Wymore, all of us can take the next step to become humbler. And just wherever you are, take that next step.
Yeah. Okay, Josh, I want to ask you, in a leadership space, sometimes culture seems to really approve of leaders who have this edge to them and they're egotistical and they drive. And you sometimes almost hear you need somebody with a huge ego to be able to drive and make this work. What have you found in your research?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably the greatest challenge to humbler leadership is that model, right? Like we look at our politics right now and we're like, if I check and see who's in these high offices, I would not classify them as humble in any way. So what you're saying, Josh, does not align with reality. And this is my best answer to that, I guess. Your definition of success depends on your time horizon. What I mean by that is that if I just wanted to make as much money as I could make today, probably the best way for me to do that is to go rob a bank or, launder some money, right? There's a lot of ways I can make a lot of money today. Now, over the long haul, is that going to lead me to be wealthy, for the next 50 years? Probably not, because I'm probably going to get caught and that money's going to go back and I'll spend time in jail and all that kind of stuff. And so really, like, what's my horizon? If there's a lot of ways to be successful that are not honest or virtuous and that do not lead to human flourishing. And so is it possible to obtain power and influence and notoriety and wealth by breaking all the rules and working against the way we are built? Absolutely. Does that lead to organizations and people that thrive over the long haul? People that we remember in history and we're grateful for? We can see how shalom was created as a result of that? I don't think so. And so for me, it's like, yeah, you can have these spikes. You can climb to the top of the mountain, but can you stay there? Can you bring people with you? And is the mountain better for it? As a Christian, again, we have that eternal horizon where we're analyzing success. Because by most measures, Jesus was a failed leader, right? He had this 3-year run where he's skyrocketing, right? The mega church is getting built, and whoops, ticked off the wrong person. Man, Jesus could have been so great. What a missed opportunity, And if we're just looking at the temporal timeline, that's what we say. But we look on the eternal timeline, it's like, what an incredible success.
Yeah.
So again, as Christians, I think our lens for interpreting success is different because our time horizon is a lot different.
That's so good. And that's the perspective, of course, is as missionaries, as Christians, that we're all shooting for. I also think there's this myth, and you talk about this a little bit too, Josh, that humble means passive. Like, oh, I'm
Mm,
not really aggressive or assertive. I'm just kind of letting things happen. But you point out tons of leaders who are complete drivers and shakers and movers, who are very humble, but also giving it everything they've got. Talk a little bit about that.
yeah. I love that. Cause again, it's one of those things that breaks our intuition. It's not our experience with leaders. You know, Jim Collins was one of the people who really kind of captivated my imagination with this and in Good to Great when he talked about level 5 leaders. And the line he had was that these level 5 leaders were relentlessly ambitious, but never about themselves. And that's where that greater purpose piece of humble leaders come in. That, you know, Stephanie, if you've got an issue, I'm going to confront you on it, not because it makes me feel better than you and I feel superior because you have a problem and I don't, not because I want to win you over and want you to like me because I'm helping you. It's like, well, no, I care about you and your ministry, and so, man, if I let you go out and have this problem, people are going to be hurt. You're going to be hurt. So I don't like to have this conversation, but for the sake of the greater purpose, like I have to. And I think it's that. It's almost it's the reluctant assertiveness, you know, that it's not about me, but for the sake of our customer, for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of the mission, I've got to put myself in this uncomfortable spot. And there's something about going in with that tentative way versus that swagger of like, yeah, I belong here and you're all blessed to listen to me. You know, it changes so much the way the message is received and lowers that defensiveness and ultimately serves that greater purpose, not just my own self-centered purpose.
Yes. And mention those 4 pillars again in case anybody missed what those were at the beginning.
Yep. Accurate self-perception. So seeing myself accurately, my strengths and weaknesses, appreciating others' strengths and contributions, really being a part of the body and relying on the body and appreciating the full body. Growth mindset, that commitment to always getting better, to focusing on the process and learning more so than just performance. And then that greater purpose, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. It's not about you kind of idea that we get from Rick Warren.
I love that. Thinking of yourself less, not thinking less of yourself. That's key right there.
Yeah. Job description of a Christian in one line, probably.
Yes, right? It's very Jesus-like. I like it. Okay, so I'm thinking of in missions, leaders, I see this with pastors all the time and with missionaries. There's this pressure to have all the answers. I mean, you can get it too. It's sometimes even in coaching or consulting. Anytime you're in a position of leadership, people think that you should know everything, and you can feel that pressure to know everything. So how does humility help a leader when they feel out of their depth or inadequate?
Oh my gosh. It's like impossible. It's impossible to live a peaceful life, I think, without humility.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if I think I have to have it all together, and I was one of those leaders. That's the story I tell in my book, right? As I was a college softball coach. I thought the leaders had all the answers, and I was so stressed out because I knew I didn't have all the answers. So there's all this churning, the duck feet under the water, right? Because I'm trying to like keep it all together. But once I realized like, oh, I can be effective without having all the answers. In fact, I'm going to be a lot more effective if I just acknowledge what everyone else already knows, which is that I don't have all the answers. That was, you know, mind blown for me. And so you see this in research too. It's not just my experience that humble people are less stressed, less anxious, better life satisfaction, like all these great outcomes because they learn to just accept the reality of who they are as it is. And that doesn't mean just like saying, well, you know, no one can know everything, so I'm going to be consciously incompetent at my job. It doesn't mean that. It means owning the reality of like, hey, you know what? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. And so on that level, it earns me more respect because you're recognizing that I'm living in reality. I'm not delusional. Because if I lie to you and you can tell I'm lying to you, then you're starting to wonder like, well, if he's lying to me about that, what else is Josh not being truthful about? And so from a respect standpoint, it's a huge gain when you can say, hey, I don't know the answer, but let me figure that out, or let's figure that out together.
Right.
And the second side of that is that because we're all battling some degree of imposter syndrome, when I own up to my limitations, it communicates to you, hey, Stephanie, this is a place where you can be real. And if you don't know the answer, you can just say that. And so your guard goes down too. And now you're actually willing to say, you know what, I've actually got some other questions, things I haven't figured out. And together we can go on this learning journey together. Not that I'm the expert and you're trying to show you're an expert, so you're on the same footing. We're both just acknowledging that we're lifelong learners. And so you see these humble leaders, the teams they lead, their teams have greater retention and engagement and growth and performance because people are faster to acknowledge when they don't have the answers, faster to then figure it out and work together rather than just sweeping it under the rug and hoping it goes away. So it does so much whenever you just are able to say, yeah, I don't know. Let's figure this out. Let's meet again. Let's talk next Thursday. Let me do some research and get back to you. That's such a credibility builder for leaders rather than the opposite.
It's refreshing. I think that we've limited ourselves as leaders to thinking the way we can help is through answers. And that is so often not what people are even looking for. They're looking for relationship. They're looking to be listened to. I mean, honestly, I think going through coaching training, I mean, you'll know too, as a fellow coach, Josh, like going through coaching training and learning how to listen and realizing that in coaching, you help somebody by accompanying them and journeying with them and asking the right questions rather than telling them what to do. At first was so deeply uncomfortable coming from the space that I'd been in as a pastor for all these years where you feel like you have to have the answers. It was so liberating. And I found that I was able to help people so much more than before because people have so much more inside of them than they even realize. And they're not looking for you to just tell them what to do. I mean, there's a space for giving advice, certainly. But I think that we just think all spaces are advice sometimes, especially, and certainly not all leaders. I don't want to make a blanket statement. But I think there's this thought is the higher I get up in leadership, the more answers I have to have. Okay, I hope that we are growing in wisdom and intellect and experience and everything, but that's not necessarily what people need. It's often not what people need. What have you found in your experience?
Yeah, man, it's so true. And so I've coached some really bright leaders who honestly probably have a lot of the answers for a lot of their people. I've worked with a couple dozen Fortune 500 organizations and their top executives. And what you see with the people when they live in that advice space is that people become codependent on them because, let's go to Stephanie. She's got the answer, right? She always knows what to do. And so the people are never growing, which is really frustrating for the leader because after a couple of years of, hey, it feels good to always be the person people want to, come to for answers. After a couple of years, I'm getting tired. I want to take a vacation, but I can't because the place is just going to fall apart when I leave. And Jim Collins talks about this in his comparison organizations. They had the good to great organizations and the others that were really similar. And oftentimes those similar organizations had a super smart CEO at the top. But Collins called them the genius with 1,000 helpers. Everybody came to them, hey, here's my decision, boss. What do you think? And they did it. And actually it worked for a while. But then either that person's ego got the best of them and they kind of imploded, or they retired and then there were no brains left in the place to make any decisions and the organization imploded. And so again, when you think that time horizon, if we think about success as leaving an organization behind that doesn't miss a beat when I leave, which is honestly really humbling because I kind of like thinking that people are going to be like, oh, it was so great when Josh was here. But again, is my greater purpose, that Josh was amazing or that I built a great organization or we accomplished a great mission? If it's the latter, I've got to think about that, leaving the legacy, which means I'm growing the people, which means I can't be the person who has all the answers all the time.
Yes. How would it change things if we let go of the need to be needed or the need to be thought of as the expert? How would that change things around us? And how would we develop leaders even that much more if we broke them of that dependency on us? That's so good. And that doesn't mean being aloof. Again, you sometimes will just see extremes in life. It's either I need you to need me and we're together 24/7, or okay, I trained you, now you do it on your own. No, what does it look like to be that leader in the middle space? And we talked about Jesus, like, let's look at Jesus as an example of leadership, because somebody might say, okay, well, you guys are talking about leadership and from a very American perspective, and we have this global community of all different kinds of leadership and all different kinds of society. We've got the honor shame, we've got, everything. But what can we learn from Jesus and his style of leadership that translates globally?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think oftentimes we think that people are humble because they have issues. And basically, the less issues you have, the less humble you have to be. Humility is something I do because I'm sinful. Well, if that was true, then Jesus would have been the most arrogant, self-centered guy ever, right? He
Well
would have walked on
said.
the scene and been like, hey, everyone, the king of the world's here. So listen up, sit down. Everyone shut up because you're wasting my time, right? Like, God's in your presence. You know, he would have acted like he was God's gift to mankind. But what's crazy was he was actually God's gift to mankind, and he was the last person to act like it. And so that tells us there's something about humility that is when we are living humbly, we are embodying Jesus like never before.
Yeah.
It's not a compensating mechanism. St. Augustine said that if you look at the teachings and the morality of Jesus, you know, the first virtue is humility, the second is humility, and the third is humility. Like, this is Jesus's operating system. And Jesus says stuff that to me does not make sense. He says, you know, I don't do anything on my own behalf. I just do what the Father tells me, or I do what the Spirit tells me to do. You know, I'm in lockstep with the Holy Spirit. It's like, wait, Jesus is dependent on the Holy Spirit? That's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well,
shoot, if Jesus was dependent on the Holy Spirit and he was God, like, what right do I have to think I can walk in and just do what I want to do? As a Christian, even building off of the stuff we talked about with the, you know, marketplace leaders, as a Christian, we know the Holy Spirit is the source of all truth and wisdom. So, gosh, far be it from us to ever think we could do this without a prayerful, listening heart to what God's doing.
Absolutely. I remember reading once that the Savior didn't have a Savior complex. And I'm like, okay, that's really good point. And you just illustrated that so well. Okay, Josh, I want to transition into something that you talk about. That's the do become flywheel. And where you emphasize how the doing leads to the becoming. And I want to hear you talk about it a little bit, because I know there is kind of two, I don't know if it's schools of thoughts, maybe just two approaches to changing behavior. And that's I need to change what I think, kind of who I am, and that leads to a change in behavior. And then there's a change in behavior that leads to a change in the way I think or believe. I want to hear a little bit about your approach and why this do become flywheel is so effective in cultivating humility.
So yeah, I love the way you phrase that. Like, it's the chicken and the egg. Which comes first? You know, what I think about myself or how I behave. And just like the chicken and the egg, you just do it, right? Like, it's not about which one comes first. You just get that process started. And so, in short, the do become flywheel means is that the things we do something to us. Jamie Smith, who's a philosopher at Calvin University, talks about how we are desiring creatures. It's our vision of the good life that shapes us, not our beliefs, more so than anything else. And you see this because you meet people in church who they can give you all the right answers for who Jesus is and what they should do, but then you watch how they live outside of that hour on Sunday morning, you're like, what happened to all that stuff you said you believed? And what that shows is that, again, our thoughts don't drive everything we do, right? If I want a chocolate chip cookie at 4:00 and I know it's not good for me and I should wait for dinner, but I really want it, I'm going to have it, even though I have all the answers for why that's not a good thing. And so if we think about changing who we are, changing our identity, it really comes to changing our desires. When we close our eyes and picture the good life, what does that look like for us? Okay, well, if you want to change your desires, how do you go about doing that? There's the role the imagination plays in that. There's also the role that our liturgies play in that. And so, you know, if I want to have a healthy body image, but I spend 10 hours a day reading Men's Health and Cosmopolitan, like, that liturgy of kind of soaking my imagination in this particular image of the good life is going to change me and make me think about the human body in a certain way. And so in the same way, if I want to have a heart of service, I can just pray, God, give me a heart of service. God, please make me more humble. Or I can just go serve, and I can feel the joy of that and die to myself in doing it when it doesn't feel good. And every time I do that thing, it makes me into a certain kind of person. It tips the scale just a little bit further. And I'm not saying we're earning salvation through this. I'm talking about it, basically our spiritual disciplines. The things we do something to us that they make us into a certain kind of person over time. Fasting doesn't make me a better Christian because God rewards my self-discipline. It makes me a more disciplined person, which means I'm better able to stay in that position of prayer when it's hard. And so the idea of this is, when you think about becoming humbler, you don't just have to wait to get zapped with this, you know, humility lightning bolt. You do the things that humble leaders do, and that slowly shapes you into a humbler person. When I ask more questions, I see the benefit of asking questions. I feel more connected. I feel the pressure release of not having to have all the answers. I realize that you had great insight I didn't even know was there. And it makes me think, oh, wow, that was great. I should ask some more questions. And that flywheel just continues to turn and turn and turn. And so as we think about becoming humbler, just figure out what is that next little thing you can do that's going to help you become humbler. And then as you become a humbler person, you naturally want to do the things that humble leaders do.
And so Josh said you said you do the things that humbler leaders do. So what are some of the things that humble leaders are known for?
Yeah, we had talked about the one already, which is asking questions. Asking questions for me is one of the power plays of a humble leader, because it hits on all four of those things at the same time. If I'm asking you a good question, like, Stephanie, what are your thoughts about this plan before we move forward? I'm recognizing I don't have all the answers. It's an accurate self-perception. And I'm appreciating your strengths and contributions, because I'm saying, I think you have some insight about this. You have a different life experience or lens than I do. So let's not leave that on the table. Like, share that with me. It's showing that growth mindset, because it's making me more teachable and open in the moment. And it's serving that greater purpose, because honestly, asking questions takes a lot more time than me just giving you my answer.
Yeah.
But is my purpose that I'm as efficient with my time as possible? Or is it that I actually connect with you well and we do this together? Is it that we have the best in decision overall? Is it that I'm growing you as a person, not just keeping myself atop the pile as the person with all the answers? If I'm serving that greater purpose, then it means I have to take a different, more connective approach. There's 10 practices I talk about in the book, but that's probably my favorite one to harp on as a coach, because it's a thing that changes things. It's more accessible for many people than other things, and it has the greatest ROI in the workplace or the mission field.
And I think people are afraid to do it. And I say that because I was afraid to do it, Josh. Like, I'll just be very real. I was afraid to ask questions. Number one, we mentioned earlier, because I was afraid that it would make it look like I didn't have the answers. And I felt like I just needed to teach and tell people things. And then secondly, I was afraid of loss of time, which you just referenced. Like, people are so not listened to nowadays, that if somebody actually asks them a question, sometimes some people will just go, whoa, and have so much to say. And it can feel overwhelming. And you can think, well, as a leader, I have these time constraints, and I don't know if I have the luxury to ask questions. So I mean, you've coached so many super high level leaders and have studied them. How are these high level leaders having the time to ask questions?
Yeah, good question. It's one of those things where it's like delegating, right? It always takes more time to teach someone to delegate than just to do it myself in the moment. But if I'm approving payroll every 2 weeks for the rest of my life, okay, well, that's, whatever, like 5 hours every 2 weeks that this is taking up, or whatever your time is. And so the question is, do I want more time over the long haul or more time now? Do I want to solve this problem once and for all and invest the time to do it and have it just be done? Or do I want this to linger for forever? And so asking the questions, like letting you vent in the moment, that could feel like a total waste of time. We had an agenda, and now Stephanie's just going off about her husband, and I'm looking at the clock. I got some places to be. But the reality is, if you're walking around carrying that and no one's helping you relieve that pressure by just hearing you, well, shoot, your productivity is dropping. Your morale is going down. Your engagement's going down. And so, sure, I could not talk about it today, but it's just a ticking time bomb. It's an infected wound that's going to get worse and worse and worse until I get a resignation from you in 6 weeks. And I'm like, whoa, where's this coming from? Now I got to invest the time to find a replacement, train that person, talk about a time suck. Like, that's huge. I could have invested a little bit of time up front to just hear you and connect with you and saved you. It kept you in our organization and kept your wisdom and experience and all that kind of stuff. And so I think because those leaders at the levels who are asking good questions, they've been in it long enough to just see how valuable people are and relationships are. They know that this investment right now is going to pay such huge dividends down the road.
Absolutely.
And frankly, it's a lot more fun to live in that way as well.
It is. And it's not a boundaryless question asking. Like, I will talk to you whenever you want for as long as you want for as long as, right. I think I said that, for as long as you want, about whatever you want. Like, there's boundaries there, But if we're to be these relational leaders, you can't be a humble leader without being a relational leader, and vice versa, because humility relates to people. So it's so important that you're bringing this up. Is there one other of the 10 that you would particularly like to point out and think could be helpful to missionaries?
Yeah, I mean, growth mindset's huge. That idea that, again, it's not about me trying to focus on my performance, but to focus on the process, to focus on growth and getting better over time, because that's kind of this little engine inside of us that leads me to not just ask questions of you so that you can grow, but to ask questions about myself. Like, hey, what are my gaps here? How could this be better? Hey, before I send this email out, could you give me some feedback on it? Help me know how to tighten things up. For me, my rhythms of confession and accountability come from that growth mindset of realizing, man, I've got some blind spots and I need other people in my life to speak into that. And so I think we have this idea that bad leaders are the ones who reject criticism and good leaders are the ones who say, hey, my door's always open, come find me if you ever have thoughts. That's okay. But the best leaders are the ones who are hunting for it. They recognize what their shortcomings are and they're looking for it, and they're building systems to harvest feedback and to help themselves grow. They're in leadership cohorts because they know that they have to keep their saw sharp, or they're not going to serve well over the long haul, all those sorts of things. And so, yeah, I'd say the growth mindset is the one where we are so afraid of what people might say about us. We're so afraid of revealing our shortcomings that we just kind of hang back, and we leave so much untapped potential on the table as a result.
And you just mentioned something in there that's like a nugget of gold that I think people might have missed. So I want to pull it back out for a second. And you talked about leaders who proactively look people out, search people out and look for them, rather than leaders who are simply available. I think that's huge, Josh, because I think a lot of leaders are understandably overwhelmed and they feel like the best they can do is like, hey, if you need me, just know you can call me anytime. Here I am. And that is great. And if they actually are available, oh my gosh, they're doing better than so many other leaders. But can we take it a step further and actually be the leaders that seek people out? Because some of the people that we serve are just never going to want to take our time. They're going to inconvenience us. And those are the ones that so often, maybe even need us the most, or they have so much potential on the inside of them. So we're missing out on people if we're just simply available. So there's the I'm not available to the I'm available to the I'm going to proactively seek you out. So you just took it to a whole nother level, which I think is huge as we think about what are the ways that we can leave. And it is doable. This might sound impossible, but we see Jesus do it. We see great leaders do it. There are ways to do it. Is there any kind of last closing thoughts you would leave along those lines? How can leaders do some of these things that just feel impossible? Maybe something like that, like being proactive.
Yeah, that's where I think the Do Become Flywheel is so helpful, because it's easy to look at, an amazing, humble leader like Jesus and think, oh gosh, well, I'm not Jesus. What's the point of trying, And again, it's like, it's about becoming humbler, not humble. There's no finish line you cross where you can just take your foot off the gas. So if you don't ask any questions in a meeting now, then your next meeting, just ask one question. Like, that's it. That's a big win. If you're not getting any feedback right now, ask your boss, hey, I'm about to do this presentation. Would you watch during the presentation, and after it's over, just hang around for like 5 minutes and give me one thing I could do better and one thing that went well? That's a very small ask, but you're starting to build that muscle of becoming a humbler leader. So wherever you are, take that next little step and celebrate that.
Yeah.
If you want to know the other 10, you can find those in the book. Maybe there's a different one that resonates with you besides the 2 we talked about today. But any kind of growth is going to serve you better, serve your people better, serve your greater purpose better too.
I love that. In the spirit of coaches, we are ending with some action steps. This is so good.
That's right.
Okay, Josh, and I want to add a little bit of what you said there by asking for somebody who just doesn't know where to start. Because for some people, they've been listening to you talk and they're like, okay, I can do that. I can ask that one question. I can seek out that one person. I can make myself available, or something like that. Some people have ideas. Some people might be listening going, I don't even know, am I humble or am I arrogant? Or like, how do I even start? What should somebody like that do?
A couple resources that I've created for that question that come to mind. My book is one, obviously, that lays out kind of the vision of humble leadership in the first half, because frankly, a lot of us have not been around great humble leaders, even honestly, some missionaries. It can be easy to be self-promoting, look at all I'm doing, in any kind of ministry space. And so part of it's just the imagination of being able to compare yourself to what humble leaders look like and realize, oh, wow, okay, that's not how I operate. That's helpful to see. And then the practices in the second half that really make that tangible and give you some traction. So book is one. There's a humbler leadership assessment that I've created based on some of the research I've done. It's on my website. That'll give you just in 3 minutes a sense of sort of where you're at and what your growth opportunities might be. And then I also have a bi-weekly newsletter that goes out that isn't just focused on humility. It's kind of all leadership things. And that's got some little nuggets as well to kind of get you thinking and get you moving on this journey as well.
I'm so glad you brought those up, because that's where I was going. If you weren't going to bring those up, Josh. And I've told you this. There are 4 weekly newsletters that I subscribe to. One, obviously, the modern day resource email. So all of you missionaries, if you're not signed up, sign up for that. But then I also subscribe to Carrie Newhoff's, to Tim Ferriss's, and to yours. And
wow.
I love the stuff that you have to share, Josh, because you're a really, really great writer as well. I would say sometimes there are authors and there are writers, and not everyone who authors a book is necessarily a great writer, but you write so well. And so your book was a pleasure to read as along while I was learning things. So, and you have some great downloadables in here as well. You've got the assessment, and then you have some charts I bookmarked in here that I wanted to go look and download. So there's a ton of free resources. And so much information packed into your book that it would take somebody a while to process through it all. So yeah, if you're in a leadership cohort with some other fellow missionaries, this would be a great book study, I think, to go through. But yeah, thank you, Josh, for writing a book that was such a joy to read and so helpful as well. So yes, we'll post links to all of that to make sure everybody can connect with the work that you've done. Thank you for coming on today and sharing. I appreciate it so much.
It's been a delight. It's great just to spend time hanging out with you. Always enjoy being in our team meetings together. So this is fun.
Could not agree more. Appreciate you, Josh.